I had to force this conversation with my husband, and the conversation being, how has quitting drinking affected our marriage? And it has affected it quite considerably. So earlier this week, I sat down and interviewed my husband, and I'll explain why it had to be an interview situation. I asked him a few questions about how my quitting drinking just over 9 months ago affected him and us in our marriage, because I realized that it's not just about me, it's about me, him, and us, and all the periphery around us. But before I go into the nitty gritty about what he said, and he said quite a lot, as a background to set the scene, I've been married to Richard for 24 years, and we've been together for a few years, 27. We met at work in London in our late 20s and married in our early 30s. So we weren't spring chickens. We were well established on our professional careers and what have you. Children did not come along until our late 30s. So we had quite a few years together to enjoy ourselves, which was a brilliant foundation for us. We worked hard, we traveled an awful lot together, and we cemented our marriage in those first few years before children came along and added a new dimension. I think that was really important for us because we still look back at those as the romantic years. We had the time to really get to know each other and create this fantastic foundation. And actually, we have an awful lot in common. We come from the same backgrounds, we come from the same kind of education. And that has weathered really well for us over the years, well, 27 years, until I quit drinking 9 months ago. So my quitting drinking 9 months ago, it was a decision that was a long time coming. I was either going to get a lot worse, or I was going to take the bull by the horns and turn the situation around. And thankfully, I chose to take action with the unwavering support of my mom, my sister, my three boys, and my husband, and I have not looked back since. So I was a complete novice at this whole game. My family knew I was falling off a cliff in slow motion, and I needed to do something to save myself from an early grave. I remember feeling so anxious, watching myself and watching them so worried and helpless. And there was nothing they could do because I am my own boss and I wouldn't listen to anybody. But I knew deep down that a change had to happen, but it had to come from within me and not from outside intervention, because that had happened to me. So it really had to be a decision that was my decision with the support of everyone else. And that is why it is sticking as well as it is now at the age of 56. So I actually quit on 1st of September. It was a planned date. I was going to get to the end of the summer. 1st of September for me is like a fresh start to a new year. Kids are back at school. I started school, and at the age of 55, boom, the decision was made. So I've been sober for 9 months. And during that time, there have been a hell of a lot of changes in my personal life. Lots of upheavals that has tested my sobriety, my mental health, and in particular, my marriage. So my husband has been under massive stress trying to sell his business. My eldest son was also going through a very stressful period at university, second year at university. At the same time, my middle son sitting his A-levels. I wanted to keep things going for him. And we moved country with 10 days notice. I can't believe I did all that in the last 6 to 8 months, but you do. And all of this tests your sobriety. And all of this was only possible because I was sober. And I can say that with great confidence now in hindsight. However, my relationship with my husband during all of this time was very strained, to say the least. The trials and tribulations of sobriety did not help with all of these extra layers of stress happening. I just felt most days that our marriage was rocky. and it was very precariously balanced. And I just kept thinking, how much more stress can this marriage take? How much can I personally take? I just couldn't figure out whether strained marriage was due to all of these outside pressures and it was just an unnaturally high level of outside pressure, or whether it was because I had gone sober and I was also transforming and was becoming a new person and discovering my new me. I honestly thought we were going to divorce. I kept thinking, I'm not sure I could take much more of this, but I knew that I couldn't renege on my sobriety. That was a decision that I had made, and I could never, ever question that decision. So, what's going to give? It's either going to be me mentally, or my kids never, or my marriage. Right, okay. I will put that on the line, and I was prepared to do that. It was a real concern and a real worry. I just had so many questions for Richard, just couldn't find the right time to talk to him. He was so mega busy, so mega stressed. He doesn't like it if I pounce on him with questions and snatch bits of his time without prepping him. To be honest with you, I didn't actually want to force this conversation because I actually didn't want to hear the answers. I was so fearful he would turn around and say, "Do you know what, Helen? You've become like an old maid and you're so damn boring since you quit drinking that, I'm ready to throw in the towel." I was absolutely convinced this was on the tip of his tongue all the time. So naturally, I was never going to force this conversation because I thought that those words were really close to the fore, and all of this was my fault. Then it was one day I was listening to one of Janet's podcasts with a lady called Sarah Rothbach, who's a fast talking, badass ex recruitment consultant. She really does talk the brutal truth. And she talked about quitting drinking and just how tricky it was that her husband was continuing to drink, and just how difficult it was to get on the whole sobriety wagon with an ex, well, with your drinking buddy who has not changed his or her behaviours. And I thought, bingo, that's exactly how I feel in my own marriage right now. She went on to say that we need to face up to these ugly truths. We need to ask our partner in a safe and positive environment, i.e., not over a drink, which is when I used to tend to broach difficult conversations. At the end of the day, I'd get the wine out, I'd have the chit chat, and then before you know it, these delicate situations would turn into a shouting match, get quite feisty, and you actually make the situation worse. It was quite inflammatory. So I listened to her. She said that she got a marriage counsellor to guide her through this very choppy water of change. I think I've lost my wife. I want to carry on drinking. What's going on? Are we still a couple? Where am I in all of this? And she said, be prepared for the answers to these questions because they're hard. And you owe it to yourself and you owe it to your husband or your partner to ask this very difficult question of, I've quit drinking, but how does this affect you? I'm actually interested in, how do you feel? Do you feel lost? Do you feel angry? Do you feel, oh, I've lost my wife. Where's she gone? Okay, I'll carry on without her. Or do you think, great, fantastic, she's finally put the bottle down and this is like really what we needed? And oh my God, I took notes, took stock, and I logged that question in my mind that I need to have this conversation when the time is right with my husband. I need to ask him, after 27 years, what does my quitting mean to you? So I thought the only way I can talk about the elephant in the room is to treat this conversation like a research project. I asked Janet for time on the Zoom cafe, and I said to Richard, listen, I'm going to do this talk. It's with a safe audience. I'm not going to repeat any specific words or anything from our conversation, but I feel I need to air and share my experience because it's always so much more helpful to do that. I told him that it was going to be about how my quitting drinking shook our marriage. I thought he'd wince, but he didn't. So I thought, okay, he thinks there's something in this conversation. So he said, great. I sent him 5 questions over the email. I said, ponder over these over the next 2 weeks. Then I'm going to set a time and we're going to have this interview and I'm going to record the interview and I'm going to draw out some key messages and then I will share some little nuggets with my tribe and we'll use it as a positive experience. And who knows, maybe you and I will gain from it as well. So we sat down. He had his questions. It was all very formal at the beginning, like a kind of work interview. It was really weird. And then we kind of loosened up and we were quite defensive at the outset. There was quite a bit of finger pointing about who drank more and who was more pissed and how. And then bit by bit, we loosened up and there were tears. We hugged and we were actually really very frank with each other. And it was overall a really positive conversation. And it was very open, very vulnerable, very loving, and very caring. So, what more could I have asked for, really? Although we only hit on about 60% of what I wanted to cover, at least it set the ground kind of level from us to be able to continue the conversation. You're probably all dying to know what on earth is she asking? So, the first question was, what did our drinking look like during our 25-year marriage? So a nice, easy one to start with, because we both massively agree with this. Well, with surprise, surprise, alcohol has always been a feature in our relationship right from day one. We met when we were 27. We first started going out in pubs, restaurants. Alcohol was always there. We socialized with alcohol. Remember, we had many years pre-kids, so we would go out 2 or 3 times a week, meeting friends, or just go out for dinner, and alcohol was always there. But interestingly, alcohol was always when we went out to socialize. We always socialized with other people or with each other, and the bottle of wine would come out. For us, alcohol was all about the high life. We socialized, we had fun, it was there. It wasn't the main thing, but it certainly took a nice big fat chair on the same table as us. We were perfect drinking buddies. We drank at the same pace, we liked the same drinks, with the huge privilege we had of being double income, no kids. We really could drink and live it up and have dinners and not even think twice about it until the children came. So that was in my late 30s, 36, I had my first child. And of course, that's a huge shift on so many levels. I was then working full time, 1 child, 2 children. I was working in a bank at the time, silly hours. I mean, how I even got into work for 7 o'clock, I do not know. But I was on some kind of treadmill. I don't think alcohol even featured. I could barely get my ass out of bed, barely get my suit on, barely get into work and function, get back home at the end of the day, pay the nannies, and then do it again. Then bit by bit, when the children started to sleep in a bit more, the parties started to swell and we started to bring the parties to our house. That's where parties at my house at the weekend with other families started. We can actually have our cake and eat it. So that carried on for a few more years. Again, drinking was always with others. We always socialised with others, and it was never a bottle of wine in front of the telly. Never. Then fast forward, the children grow up, and suddenly, before you know it, late 40s, early 50s, it's around the time that COVID happened, and drinking became a two-person pastime. Didn't need anyone else. Well, there was no one else. It was just me, Richard, the dog, and the kids just scarpered. Every day we found an excuse to reward ourselves after, because we were transforming our house at the time, did this massive project in the garden. And at the end of the day, after all that hard graft, 2 bottles of wine in the sun. Then when COVID ended, Richard goes back to work. I'll carry on the party, but it'll just be a party for me. And that carried on for a while as well, until you all know what happened in the end. 55, the party had to stop. So, yes, we were in big agreement about how the drinking featured in our marriage. It featured very heavily. I then asked Richard, so when did you notice, Richard, I had a problem? He was very quick to the point there and he said, well, pretty much in your 40s, I'd say. He was always traveling. He was always in London. I was in France with the kids. He would call me at the end of the day, each day, just to find out how the kids were, what I was up to. He said, it's locked. You always sound a bit pissed on the phone. It was only about 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening. So he picked up on that quite quickly. He also noted that when we were together, we had a drink. It was like I was on this mission to get pissed as quickly as I could. He called me a sprinter. So 5:30, he's still doing his Zoom calls. I get a head start. By the time he came down for the apéro, I was already 2 or 3 glasses in. He was supposed to allowed to have quicker through the wine bag between 5 and 7 p.m. Little did he know that that was my window to get it in, because at 7 to 8 p.m., that was when I had to get back onto the mummy kind of treadmill and back into responsibility mode and start making the dinner. Make the dinner, everyone sit down for dinner, and then tidy up after everybody. And so meanwhile, he could carry on drinking whilst I was prepping and everything. But of course, I would have a little glass whilst I was prepping. But then basically my drinking finished when dinner was started. So that was 3 hours of pretty fast drinking. Then I would conk out, pass out rather, and he would continue drinking. But to be honest with you, we had a little pact between us. It was a secret pact. That we didn't actually mention each other's drinking habits, because I knew he had a problem. He knew I had a problem. But neither of us could really shine the light on the other person without revealing our own drinking nonsense as well. How could I comment on how much he's drinking when, look at me? So we were as bad as each other. Okay, he drank half again as I did. Maybe he could take it more, but I went from tipsy to pissed very quickly. And he could just keep that going just that bit longer. So he did. He would go to bed later than me and carry on drinking. So one thing's for sure, I never wanted to hear his feedback or any of his comments. I definitely didn't want to hear it from him. I definitely didn't want to hear it from my sister. As I started to pick up books about, particularly the Claire Pooley book, I thought, gosh, this is me. Things aren't right. This isn't right. But when you compare yourself with your husband who drinks more than you and not wanting to hear the truth or see the truth, I continued, but I moderated. And this is where the rules came in around end of my 40s, early 50s. I moderated for about 5 years to try and regain some control. I never tried sobriety. That was just too brutal. But moderation seemed to be a good halfway house. So I had a cap of 50 units a week, white wine, champagne only, 2 days off because I'd read that's what you're supposed to do to bounce back and feel amazing. So I had all these rules, but deep down, all the questions were just eating away, eating away. Why couldn't I bloody well slow down? Why can't I drink more normally? What on earth was going on? Why can't I stop? I was constantly Googling, am I an alcoholic? How much is too much wine? I tell you what, the keyboards are worn out how many times I typed that question in. How much is too much wine? Is there a straight answer on the internet? No. Please tell me you've all put that same question into the internet. I'll tell you, I made every answer fit me so that I wasn't drinking too much wine. Every single one. Because there is no right answer, because it really is down to you. For one person, it might be 2 glasses and you're absolutely off your face. For others, it might be 2 bottles. As for the safe guidelines, government guidelines of 14 units, well, who's that for? Definitely wasn't for me. I used to laugh, of course, 14. Well, that's in a day, isn't it? Anyway, so I pretended nothing was wrong for 5 years, and Richard looked on, and we both continued in parallel, drinking the same way, sitting on a giant bomb that was about to go off. And then the bomb did go off, and that's when I had to quit. So at that point, I asked Richard, okay, so I quit. I don't think there were too many surprises. I think the biggest surprise to my family and my husband was that I actually stuck to it and I actually meant business. I said to him, how have I changed in the last 9 to 10 months since I quit? How have I changed? How do I look to you? I didn't really want to hear the answer to this. I was really not wanting to hear the answer to this. He started off very gently. Well, Helene, it's really noticeable you've got more energy. Boom. He said you seem to be doing a lot more sport and fitness, which is true. I seem to be in better health, which is true. But the bit that really got me, he said, well, I just love getting you back again, Helene. I felt like I got you back. At this point, I burst into tears. And then when I burst into tears, he chucked him. And who would have thought that would have been the trip? Who would have thought that that would have been my biggest fear? I was convinced that I had diluted myself down to a person that I no longer was. And in fact, it was the opposite. And everyone has since told me the opposite, that you have become more you, Helene, since you've stopped. All that time, what freaking glasses was I wearing? So I was thinking, but no, this isn't me. This is not me right now. You've probably seen from all my WhatsApp messages going, who am I? I'm just so boring. I'm like this old maid, and I'm just really unsure and really lost my confidence and all the rest of it. In fact, with time, good old time, it's actually the opposite. When he said that, I, well, I just launched and gave him a big kiss, and I said, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. And I explained, although he probably thought I was a complete nutter, that that was actually the words I was fearing the most. So what he then very quickly jumped in to say was, I do tipsy Helene, but I do not miss pissed Helene. For me, tipsy Helene and pissed Helene were the same person, right? Tipsy Helene was a bit flirty, a bit outre, always up for a dance, always ready to get on the dance floor within 5, 10 minutes, got the confidence to get up and get going. I was jokey, I was silly, I was a little bit naughty, a good laugh, just someone fun to be with. And Richard loved tipsy Helene. And the first glass, max 2 glasses. But pissed Helene was waiting really close behind in the curtain, behind that curtain, just waiting to pounce. And she'd be right there on that third glass. Sometimes it was even earlier. And before you know it, pissed Helene would come out. She'd be slovenly, she'd be gregarious, feisty, really unpleasant, blurring. And then when it got messy, staggering around. And apparently, my sister told me this, and I was mortified. My eyes started to droop. Apparently, I'd get this lazy, funny eye thing going on. Oh my God. I went, oh my God, that is messy. Thank God I was too pissed to notice. But basically, motor skills just go. I thought Tipsy Helen and Pissed Helen were the same person now. So it was really important they pointed that out. And I listened, and that was very sobering to hear that. This sexy, flirty, hilarious version of me after a few glasses, and it clearly was not the case. So yes, that was a real eye-opener that he could tell me that whilst I was sober and I didn't jump down his throat. Hence why this interview setup was a really good way of hearing this message without it hurting too much. So I then asked, how has my quitting affected your drinking? So at the very beginning of my journey, Richard was in a high stress situation, trying to flog his business. He was barely under the same roof as me, so we barely saw each other anyway. They probably didn't even notice I wasn't drinking, but when he was at home, yeah, he continued to drink every day. That really bugged me. I found that really difficult. Thank God we agreed that he would not drink wine or we'd have wine in the house. And that was a lifesaver because wine and champagne are my trigger drink. And so he drank beers. He drank beers. Who would have thought beers can make you drunk? I didn't know because I'm not a beer drinker. But it was really weird, me watching him getting pissed and me not being pissed, and that really annoyed me. So that was really tricky at the beginning. But after about 6 months, 7 months, he started to relax a bit more and he started to land and he started to observe. And he noticeably dialed down his drinking of his own accord. At our interview, he said, "Do you know what? I think I've actually reduced my intake to about a quarter." I remember it was very high. So a quarter is incredible. He will never abstain. He loves a drink, but he will not drink every day now. And he is very conscious. Every time he opens a can, he will only buy 1 can, 2 cans. He's very conscious about the drinks he's having, and he very consciously makes the decision to not drink every day. So I have definitely helped him to observe his own behavior. Well, good for me, good for him. I'm relieved that he's actually taking his health into his own hands as well. So my quitting has definitely made my husband reflect on his own drinking, and it's been like an alcohol experiment for him, which is brilliant. I could never have asked him to quit with me. The best I could hope for was that he would dial down his drinking, which he did eventually, and to not have any of my trigger drinks in the house. To all of you newbies out there, just focus on that. Don't have any booze in the house, particularly the ones that will tempt you. It just can't work. So he stuck to his part of the bargain. And whenever we went out, he would just stick with beers, not wine. He had to figure it out for himself, and he did get there eventually. So I can say that there's light at the end of the tunnel. I can honestly say now, 6 months of hard, deep down resentment and remorse and change, that there's been a nice, slow 3 month progression. And we are in a good place now. We are talking more openly thanks to this, and we will continue to do that. Don't underestimate your decision on your marriage or your partnership or your relationships, because it is like a bomb. Certainly for me, it was like a bomb going off. It was like the relationship shook. It was very violent. It exploded in many pieces and in different directions. We became deaf to each other's feelings during the outset. We even put a mask over our eyes, pretending nothing was happening. Bit by bit, things start to settle. You start to make tweaks. You start to adapt. Yeah, things have become more vibrant. Things become much more open and settled into a nice, comfortable pattern again, which is amazing. I feel like I don't have to try hard anymore. It's just found its natural groove. What I do want to do is to extend hope, encouragement, particularly if you're early on in your sober journey, and particularly if your partner still drinks heavily or at all, or any of your trigger drinks. Messages I've got to finish on. Number one, remove all trigger drinks from the house for at least a year. You have to have this pact with your partner. Even if it's the minimum you agree on, just agree on that. Do not drink my poison in front of me ever. Number two, communicate, communicate, communicate. For me, that took a long time to get there, but I did in the end. And I feel confident now that we can start chatting more openly without having a bust up. Look back on your drinking days and look back on those happy memories, because there have been lots of happy memories with us drinking. I can't just throw those away. There have been some really great memories, and I will talk about those. I won't fantasize about them, but I will talk about them with honesty and, positivity. But I'll also talk about how great I feel now that I have stopped, and how much better I am in our marriage, and I will continue to contribute more to our marriage in a different way. And the third thing I would say is wait it out. Quitting drinking, like I said, is the bomb that potentially will go off in your marriage. And it's seismic. It's the same seismic level as when you have a baby, when you lose your job, or if there's a death in the family. It's a really is an explosion, and you just have to wait for the dust to settle and for you to find your groove again. It took us 6 months. Maybe it's quicker for you. Maybe it's a lot longer. Maybe it's never. Maybe those pieces never do solder back together into a new working pattern and into work and go forwards. But we have found new routines, new habits, some around alcohol-free drinks, lots of new alcohol-free activities. And of course, he continues doing his thing with his friends. But for me, it's all about just feeling comfortable and confident enough to talk to Richard without compromising myself and stewing and keeping those horrible feelings inside. So thank you so much for letting me have the chat. It was only by forcing the date today, and I nearly bailed on you all twice. And I thought, no, 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 no. You've got to put yourself into uncomfortable situations and get yourself out of your comfort zone to grow. And this was my latest uncomfortable situation, and I feel bloody great. And I'm so glad I did it. I couldn't recommend it more. The process by which I arrived at today through the interview worked for me, and it might work for you. So thank you.